AI colonialism is using insidious means to enrich the wealthy at the expense of poor communities and countries already impoverished by former colonial empires. Decolonial AI could return power back to the global south. Karen Howe was a front page award winner, the senior AI editor at MIT Technology Review, and writer of the weekly newsletter, The Algorithm, which was named one of the best newsletters on the internet in 2019 by the Webby Awards, writing, "Artificial intelligence is creating a new colonial world order." An MIT Technology Review series investigates how AI is enriching a powerful few by dispossessing communities that have been dispossessed before, written on April 19th, 2022. I'll read an abridged version, and I encourage you to read the full article. An increasing number of scholars have argued that AI is repeating the patterns of colonial history. AI is now using more insidious means to enrich the wealthy and powerful at the great expense of the poor. I began to investigate these claims when my husband and I began to journey through Seville, Córdoba, Granada, and Barcelona. As I read The Cost of Connection, one of the foundational texts that first proposed data colonialism, I realized that these cities were the birthplace of European colonialism. In Barcelona, physical remnants abound. Wealthy Spanish families amassed riches from their colonial businesses. The Casa Yo Morera was built in the 20th century with profits made from the sugar trade in Puerto Rico. While Puerto Rico still suffers from food insecurity because its fertile land produced cash crops for Spanish merchants instead of sustenance for the local people. The AI industry does not seek to capture land as the conquistadors did, but the same desire for profit drives it to expand. The more users, the more subjects for its algorithms, the more data it can harvest from their activities, movements, and even their bodies. The industry has developed new ways of exploiting cheap labor, often in the global south, shaped by implicit ideas that such populations don't need livable wages and economic stability. AI Colonialism series digs into these parallels. We head to South Africa, where AI surveillance tools built on the extraction of people's behaviors and faces are re-entrenching racial hierarchies and fueling a digital apartheid. We head to Venezuela, where AI data labeling firms found cheap and desperate workers amid a devastating economic crisis, creating a new model of labor exploitation. We visit ride-hailing drivers in Indonesia who are learning to resist algorithmic control and fragmentation. We end in Aotearoa, where an indigenous couple are wresting back control of their community's data to revitalize its language. Together, the stories reveal how AI is impoverishing the communities and countries already impoverished by former colonial empires. AI could be a way for the historically dispossessed to reassert their culture, voice, and rights to determine their own future. That is ultimately the aim of this series, to broaden the view of AI's impact on society so as to begin to figure out how things could be different. It's not possible to talk about AI for everyone without confronting the obstacles. A new generation of scholars is championing a decolonial AI to return power from the global north back to the global south. My hope is that this series can provide a prompt for what decolonial AI might look like, and an invitation, because there's so much more to explore. Here are the takeaways. First, we cannot separate our present-future wealth or lack thereof from the historic colonialism. Karen Howe's honeymoon along the southern coast of Spain through Seville, Córdoba, Granada, and Barcelona to this day hold the physical remnants born in part from the investments of wealthy Spanish families who amassed riches from their colonial businesses and funneled the money into their lavish mansions. The Casa Yo Morera cannot be separated from the atrocities committed in Puerto Rico to make that mansion beautiful. And Puerto Rico still suffers from food insecurity for so long because its fertile land produced cash crops for Spanish merchants instead of sustenance for the local people. In the United States and across the world, the history of colonialism is almost glorified, as conquering land is connected to freedom and the voices of the conquered remain silenced. The dominant narrative of history globally has been written by the conquerors, and it's a sanitized version to allow billions of people to live comfortably without having to confront the fact that the land they live on was acquired through force and mass murder, that the buildings and architecture they love so much are the result of exploitation of indigenous populations, and that the future their children will enjoy will be built on the backs of foundations slaves produce but were never paid a fair share for. But it doesn't have to be this way. Just as Karen Howe took it upon herself to see the intersections of her personal trip and her reporting, we can choose to see the intersections between the places we call home and the places we admire in the history of colonialism that allowed that to happen, and take redress into our own hands. We don't have to wait for a government or organization to formally give an apology or declare reparations. We have the power simply by existing that we can restructure the land we live on to serve indigenous populations, to help out those who have been historically excluded from society through generations, because we cannot separate ourselves and our progress from the necks of those our ancestors stepped on. The damage can be undone not with finger pointing or blaming, but looking in the mirror and at our feet, at our land, the language that we speak, our cultural customs, our technology, and seeing how our success connects to the exploitation of vulnerable populations around the world from colonialism, so we can repair the damage done to our communities. Second, beyond traditional colonialism, data colonialism is now a more insidious means to enrich the wealthy and powerful at the expense of the poor. In the same way land was captured to subjugate populations to work to create the inventions on the facade of the mansion, a light bulb, a telephone, a gramophone, and a camera, the conquistadors of the Caribbean and Latin America today capture users to improve their algorithms. And the more data harvested from human activities, movements, and bodies, the more profit these companies are able to produce, completely extracted without profit shared with the co-creators of the platforms, the users themselves and their data. The data is used to further the aim of major corporations for profit, not for the benefit of the end user. We see this in abysmal end user license agreements, online and digital technology privacy contracts that users click away in seconds, allowing corporations near complete control over the user's information. Purdue University describes data colonialism as, quote, the process by which governments, non-governmental organizations, and corporations claim ownership and privatize the data that is produced by their users and citizens, end quote, and, quote, capitalist accumulation by disposition, end quote, through the integration of smartphones and other portable technologies into our everyday lives. Personal aspects of our lives are now collected. Producers of the data are the ones who are the most often dispossessed of the right to own and control this resource. Data collected from already disadvantaged populations for medical, political, and social purposes in a capitalist system becomes yet another way to keep the foot of citizens on the neck of each other in a brutal system of competition and domination. Instead of colonialists exploiting labor through mass-scale slavery and the propagation of racist beliefs that dehumanized entire populations, data colonialists exploit cheap and hazardous labor, often in the global south, operating on the premise that our neighbors in these regions don't deserve to have the resources they need to survive and not have to worry about their livelihood each day. While I am still vehemently against the central banking and money system of capitalism because it pits citizens against each other in competition instead of cooperation through mutual aid, and we can never achieve an egalitarian or free society while operating under capitalism, we can't ignore the reality that in the current capitalist system, these folks are not making livable wages or economic stability. Third, artificial intelligence is impoverishing the communities and countries that don't have a say in its development. This takes me back to a previous episode where we discussed how Secretary of State Antony Blinken made a deal with the Congo, Zambia, Angola, and the EU at the sides of the G20 summit in India to reconstruct the Lobito corridor for exporting critical minerals to the West, where the adults and children who are going to be suffering in the mines from human rights abuses and low quality of life producing the minerals have no seat at the table and of course are getting no profit from the result of their hard work and contribution. This not only demonstrates the insidious nature of capitalism, where you have a group of people contribute to the success of an industry or product, but only one person or a small group of executives and the majority shareholders reap the benefits of everyone else's work, but on top of that, they are actually helping produce products and services that are further entrenching them lower into the system of capitalism, further into poverty. Our neighbors will suffer in South Africa, where AI surveillance tools are extracting people's behaviors and faces to re-entrench racial hierarchies and fuel a digital apartheid. In Venezuela, where data labeling firms grab cheap and desperate workers amid an economic crisis, creating a new model of labor exploitation. In Indonesia, where ride-hailing drivers must resist algorithmic control and fragmentation by building power through community. And in Aotearoa, the Maori name for New Zealand, where an indigenous couple are wresting back control of their community's data to revitalize its language. These are the same communities that have already been impoverished by apartheid, colonization, and exploitation in years past, and it continues to this very moment. Your history textbook should be discussing this now because it wasn't a thing of the past, and we cannot let it be something we look back on 100 years later and then label as bad. It is bad now, and we must build grassroots coalitions with each other, teach each other, and use the skills and knowledge we all have as individuals to uplift the most vulnerable, to escape the vicious trap and cycle of poverty, capitalism, and colonization brings to communities worldwide. It's our job to do the work, and I would encourage you to read the full MIT Technology Review's new AI Colonialism series, which you can find linked in the description. This is why decolonial AI should be the path forward. Karen Howe emphasizes the importance of shifting power from the global north back to the global south, from Silicon Valley back to the people. Again, hearkening back to our episode covering the West's purchase of Libido Corridor and Cobalt Metals' use of AI to determine mine locations in Africa while based in Berkeley, California, funded by Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. There's so much more to explore what decolonial AI looks like, and in the words of Frantz Fanon in his seminal work, The Wretched of the Earth, decolonization is always a violent event. Fourth, and again, similar to the previous episode discussing how AI is the new colonialism with critical resource mining in Africa, major corporations have shown that they cannot be trusted to lead the path to safer AI. AI for the people, and definitely not decolonial AI, because companies like Google, Facebook, and OpenAI are feeding the masses propaganda to further consume their products for higher profits, regardless of the damage it does to our Earth or abuse on our neighbors worldwide. I'm glad Karen Howe calls out Google, Facebook, and OpenAI as just a few major corporations that are touting the positives of AI without discussing how they are wreaking havoc on entire nations and populations of historically colonized and marginalized people, making their lives even harder to live. They just preach AI for everyone at Google, and responsible AI at Meta, and broadly distributing its benefits at OpenAI, without being honest and acknowledging the obstacles that stand between so-called progress and devastating entire populations of our society. And with that, my conclusion is that each and every one of us who is involved or interacts with artificial intelligence must center themselves in decolonial artificial intelligence, a way for people historically dispossessed to reassert their culture, voice, and right to determine their own future. We need to imagine and begin building a new future where things are different. We are the owners of this world, each and every one of us. And with the power of connection and technology, we can decolonize the land we live on. We can make sure that we never forget that our success or tribulations today cannot be disconnected from the history of colonization in days past, and data colonialism that is the next biggest threat to our world that is unfolding right before our eyes, mostly impoverishing communities that not only don't have a say in its development, but also communities historically colonized. We need the computer scientists, people that are checking on the code, people at these companies that know what's going on to share what's going on and share knowledge openly and freely so that we all win. We must stay vigilant for the AI propaganda and understand the obstacles we face will not create higher profits, but will return what is rightfully the products and data of people back to themselves to end exploitation. That's it for this episode. Please let me know in the comments or via email your thoughts on this discussion, where you agree, where you disagree, and your ideas for steps we can take to move forward. I hope to continue this discussion with you all so that we can make sure the history textbooks of the future don't cite this time as the new colonialism of humanity from AI. Take care.